Yeah.
All right, hello everyone, and welcome to our Transmedia Art Seminar. My name is Magda Romanska, and I'm a chair of the seminar. We first want to thank very much Mahindra Humanities Center and Meta Lab at Harvard for hosting us. And today we are thrilled to welcome Duska Radosavljevic, who's going to be talking to us about oral dramaturgies in all different types of contexts. And we are thrilled to have Duska here, who is an accomplished scholar and practitioner, and who brings two perspectives in her research and her practice. So Duska, I'm going to pass on the baton to you and get off the camera.
Okay, thank you, Magda. And thank you for this invitation. Actually, I'm really honored to speak in this context today, and I feel like I need to acknowledge also that the upheaval that the academic community is going through, both in the United States and in my native country, Serbia, and to express my solidarity for all colleagues and students fighting oppression and injustice. I do have a couple of caveats about the talk. The first one is, Magda, that I have over-prepared a bit. So I will try to sort of edit as I go along. Maybe I will over-edit, I don't know, but please feel free to interrupt me or let me know if I overrun. I understand we are talking for about 50 minutes to an hour and then having a Q&A. The second thing I need to say is I'm not an expert in transmediality. I come to this series with a huge curiosity and interest in how theatre making processes are changing within what we casually call the digital age. The term is also in the title of my book and my talk, and I guess maybe it's useful to say that by this term I mean the period of contemporaneity in which digital technologies permeate everyday life through the intensive use of personal computers, smartphones, high-speed internet, and other forms of data processing. In a way, the project I will talk about today, the Aural Dramaturgies project, is kind of embroiled in this long-term interest and my preceding body of work, where I have been dealing with ways of working in theatre and changing trends and reconfigurations of authorial, critical, and the processes of reception. This work is resolute in its foregrounding of artistic process as the object of research, in an attempt to identify what I call the artistic idiom of specific artists and companies whose work I research, and in seeking to extrapolate its findings from empirical data, such as watching theatre performances, reviews, and interviews with artists. And thirdly, the project I will talk about today has generated an abundance of material, and it is hard to be fully comprehensive and inclusive in this case. So I hope that I won't miss out anyone really significant or any particular work or aspect of the work that is important today. Although, of course, it's hard to be sure that I can cover everything. So I can now share my presentation. So there is a bit of fumbling here. I'm sorry. Just need to. There we are. So here we are. The presentation on oral dramaturgies, a transmedial innovation of the digital age, and I want to draw your attention to the question mark here in the title. It is placed here to indicate that the primary purpose of this presentation is really to make an invitation to you to open a dialogue and a conversation, which is kind of in the spirit of the research project I'm talking about. And also in the spirit of this project is the fact that I will mostly talk through this PowerPoint presentation. I did prepare some text to read, but I don't think I will get to reading because that might add to the time, although of course it would also add to the coherence if I was to read instead of speak. But anyway, we can't have it perfect. So this is the structure of the talk. I will talk to you about the Aural Dramaturgies project, which was a HRC funded research project in the UK that ran between 2020 and 2022. I will tell you briefly about how this research interest came about, some key relevant findings that it yielded, and how it contributes to the topic of transmediality before we open to for Q&A. So the first thing I want to mention in terms of contextualizing this work, I mean, the work has multiple kind of genealogies, but it kind of goes back to the year 2002 and the Edinburgh Festival, where I draw a lot of my research from. I think that's maybe one thing to say about my previous work as well. The Edinburgh Festival Fringe has been, in a way, a source of a lot of primary material for my research. In 2002, I for a number of years, I was present at the Edinburgh Fringe as a theatre critic for the Stage newspaper. 2002 was something like the 5th year I was there. I saw this show, The Vomity of Errors, made by a Chicago-based company, Vomity International, as part of adjudicating for some acting excellence awards, and they were nominated as Best Ensemble. And I will play you a trailer for this piece. It's not huge, it's not, great quality of the video, but you will get an idea of what we are dealing with here. So hopefully this will work now. If you can't hear it, let me know.
30 years ago, in New York City, this biddy named Betty that was oh so pretty met an MC by the name of MC Agion, who could get him jumping no matter what stage he's on. MC Age would grab the mic and rock it, take the crowd, pull him in and stick him in his pocket. Nobody could knock it. He was an innovator in a freestyle match. You never had a prayer. He was a metaphor for hip-hop in its early stages, a true art form that would last for ages. Now MC Agion and Betty got locked up, married that is, and then Betty got knocked up, pregnant that is, and her stomach started growing bigger and bigger until she was overflowing. Now MCE was flowing, working the rap circuit, talking with his agent, starting to network it, trying to make the bank to secure his kid's future, buying new dresses for Betty that would suit her. Cause she was growing larger, wider every minute. She would look down at her tummy wondering, what's in it? 4 months later, in a downtown hospital, Betty gave birth to what was then impossible. Quadruplets! 4 baby boys, I'm talking 4. What? Beautiful bundles of joy. Now MCE had been prepared financially for one little kid. So when they came out sequentially, 1 to the 2, the 3 to 4, his heart skipped a beat and he almost hit the floor. There were 2 sets of identical twins on
Okay. So I'll unfortunately I can't play all of it, but you get the idea. Sorry, it's still going. Sorry. Okay. So here we are. Is my presentation back on? I don't think it is. I will reshare it. So here we are. There we are. This was what the company called an adaptation of Shakespeare's Comedy of Errors. It was quite a discovery for me. I have to confess that I didn't really have a very sophisticated knowledge of rap as a musical genre. I belonged more to the generation that sort of grew up with post-punk. But I was very intrigued and pleasantly surprised by how well rap worked with Shakespeare. And there is a quote here by Lynn Gardner at the time where she notes that Shakespeare offered his audiences the poetry of the times, and since rap is the poetry of ours, there seems nothing wrong with dragging a 16th century play into the 21st century. I was quite intrigued by this, and at the time I was finishing my PhD, which was on the topic of theater, Yugoslav theater in Yugoslavia in the 1980s and 1990s, and as part of writing the introduction to this PhD, I was mentioning kind of contextually the tradition, the oral tradition of the so-called oral literature that existed in all of the Balkan countries. And I was reading at the time also about the work of Milman Parry and Albert Lord, who were both incidentally Harvard professors that worked on, they were classicists, and they worked on Albert Lord, on Milman Parry's thesis that actually Homeric verse was a byproduct of performance, that it wasn't, as we had believed for centuries, literature that was written, but rather records of performances of the poets who performed these epics. And in order to substantiate this thesis, Parry and Lord spent time in the 1930s in Yugoslavia, researching the then existing performers of this epic poetry, and studying that process of working, which they described in their work. And this is actually, I'm sharing here an extract from Marshall McLuhan's Gutenberg Galaxy, which on its first page cites the importance of this work of Milman Parry and Albert Lord. But Milman Parry and Albert Lord therefore offered this idea of oral formulaic theory in a book that was published by Lord in 1960, and it was obviously quite an influential idea on McLuhan as well in writing the Gutenberg Galaxy. McLuhan was a professor in the School of Communication at Toronto University. And this is also where Walter Ong, one of his sort of followers and colleagues, wrote a book called Orality and Literacy in 1982, where he reflects on the whole of history of this civilization by reference to the notion of how orality was displaced by literacy, and how in the kind of broadcasting age of the 1980s, 1960s, 70s, and 80s, what we were witnessing, according to Ong, was the notion of secondary orality that was coming back, and was coming back in a slightly different categorical disposition from what he called the primary orality. This led to some other scholars also proposing more recently, and in relation to the age of Twitter, the notion of the Gutenberg parenthesis. You will see that I'm now coming right back to sort of more present day sources. But these are Danish scholars, Lars Ole Sauerberg, sorry if I'm mispronouncing, and Thomas Petit, who kind of brought out this thesis of the Gutenberg parenthesis, similar to what McLuhan and Ong were really talking about, the idea that in the digital age we are exiting the parentheses of the literary printing press-based age. And what was interesting in the work of Petit, actually, who was a medieval scholar, was the way in which he was talking about how Shakespeare was actually at the beginning of the parenthesis, in a way, and that there was still some relevance of this primary orality that hadn't quite been lost in such a significant way yet, that was evident in Shakespeare's work. And so, I mean, that kind of took me back to thinking about this adaptation that I mentioned earlier, and the ways in which the various registers of oral performance were kind of coming through to us via these different modifications that might be characterized as technological. In this genealogy also, it's very notable to turn to Ngugi wa Thiong'o's ideas of orature and cyberture, as he calls it. And here he arrives at very similar ideas, really, around the kind of history of civilization, where he notes that what we are witnessing now with the kind of arrival in the digital age is what he calls cyberture, or a form of orality that is conditioned by the digital context. So I will now actually show you what these Balkan performances or what this oral tradition in the Balkans sounds like. And I will show you this by reference to this particular performance by a young man in Montenegro. It so happens that Montenegro is the part of the Balkans that really preserves this tradition in the most kind of authentic way, if you like. In terms of the instrument being played here, the instrument is called gusle. And even though now the process of composition has changed, and very often these guslars, as they're called, are actually writing their text rather than composing it there and then, we still have this idea of a meter being very present, and the rhythm, and they're using this instrument as a way of actually establishing the rhythm in their performance. I have to warn you, it's not a sound that sounds familiar to our ears, but I will let you see what you think about that before I proceed. So here we are. Oh, sorry, that's still going. Just a second. Okay. Now, the reason why I'm playing you this particular number is because I really wanted to play this other one, which is a contemporary rendering of this same epic about the so-called, the epic is called The Death of Priest Mile Jovovich, which was written, composed by a gusle player in the 1970s in Montenegro. And it is about a particular priest and his act of bravado against the Turkish the Turkish occupier in Montenegro I think it's set in the 19th century. That same number was really, I mean, it is the kind of work that's only familiar to very niche enthusiasts. It's not something that really reaches wide audiences, although in Montenegro there is quite a significant following for this sort of gusle playing. But the way in which this particular number reached a very wide audience in the former Yugoslavia was in the year 1991 via the work of the artist that goes by the name of Rambo Amadeus, who I will show you what he did with it, and then I'll tell you a bit more about it. So here we are. Oh, sorry, I now have some Swedish adverts.
Jag tror inte det finns några
I don't know how
allergifria
to,
roliga djur.
Alltså vi funderar lite på fiskar.
Under laken?
I don't know, I'm
Två
getting
kanske?
alcohol
Ja,
cider beer
jag har
or
haft orm en
something
gång,
like
det
that.
var
So,
kul.
Nej.
okay.
Smrt. Smrt. Popa Mila Jovovića. Smrt. Popa Mila Jovovića. Smrt. Popa Mila Jovovića. U danima kad na ništa Crnogorci udariše, kad bijahu došli dani da ne bude turski više, u lovoru crnogorskom pokraj Kule Lekovića neko knjazu okleveta Popa Mila Jovovića. A knjaz Mila dozivaše uz prisustvo svih vojvoda, pa mu reče: Pope Milo, nici vino, nici voda. Kad dođuše Pope Milo, poleće mu sablji ruka, dva oka ko strijele sijevnuše u hajduka. Vojvode se uplašiše od izgleda vuka gorskog, da oružje ne potegne na vladara crnogorskog. Kao da mu oštri mačem srce muško rasiječe, pa zavika gospodaru: Bog za to šta to reče. Te ljuti to napuštio gospodara i vojvode i pod šator svoj svileni sa mislima teškim oze. Kao ljutni gusle zgrabi odjeknuše, tanke strune kliknu. Milo kao sokote se majkom četnom kune, da će poći u grad Nišić sam bez ikog istog dana i na Megdan poslat silnog Mušovića kapetana.
Okay, so what we have here is transmedial kind of translocation, transposition of the original epic. But what is significant is the time in which this was made, and it was the year 1991 when the war in Yugoslavia was about to start. So in a way, it could be interpreted as a comment on this kind of call to arms that is present also in the original epic, that kind of ends tragically, and in some ways foregrounds and foreshadows what is about to happen with the ongoing events at the time. Another interesting thing is this formal aspect of that video, which where we have the footage of Sergei Eisenstein's film Alexander Nevsky, which is about the invasion of the Templars of Novgorod in Russia. And also the footage of the singer, the performer, who is kind of just performing in the streets of Belgrade. And I can tell you there are multiple MA and PhD dissertations about this particular work, analyzing it both musicologically and in terms of the use of the video in this particular music video. And I also wrote extensively in this book that accompanies the project Aural Dramaturgies, where I was particularly interested in these various forms of juxtaposition that are present in this particular work, in terms of different registers of orality and oral performance, but also the actual juxtaposition of what is heard and what is seen, and the way in which it invites the audience in to make the meaning in different ways. So it never makes any explicit commentary on what is going on at that point in time, but in some ways creates a kind of puzzle for the audience to enter into. So that I kind of had that particular artifact in mind also for a while before I wrote this Aural Dramaturgies project, and was waiting for a time to return to it. And finally, another thing that emerged from my work at the Edinburgh Festival was this trend of, this is the last video I will share with you today, of Middle Child's, this is the name of the company, piece, All We Ever Wanted Was Everything. I will show you the trailer of this video, which was made, the show was made in 2017 and was commissioned as part of the City of Culture in Hull in the north of England in that year. So final video now, here we are. again,
Tor kliar med hårbotten. Återfukta din hårbotten som ett proffs med Head & Shoulders Derma X Pro.
Barbie girls, beat your bones, more money and more problems. I believe I can fly. Believe I can fly. Stars in a rise, so shut up and drive with all my friends. Time to pretend what's done is done. La da da. Our time has come. Ha ha ha. We're doing what we want to. And no one's gonna stop us.
So this is All We Ever Wanted Was Everything, which was premiered, as I said, in 2017. And what was quite significant about this particular piece is that it, in a way, hybridized a number of different performance genres that belong to the emergent form of gig theater that kind of started to be recognized in around that time, from 2016 onwards. Theater critics started to write about the so-called gig theater. So this wasn't the only example of this particular work, of this kind of work, which is a piece of theater that looks like a music gig. So, it has a play, it has characters, it has dialogue, but it, in terms of its mise en scène, the mise en scène only consists of microphones, amplifiers, a drum kit, and some guitars. And in this way, it triangulates gig theater between, in this case, State of the Nation play, the form of play that Michael Billington recognizes as sort of being some sort of a diagnostic tool for the UK, in the UK, and often performed on the stages of the National Theatre. This play, as I said, was commissioned in 2017, but it has this form where it follows two people at 4 points in their lives: when they are born in Hull in the year 1987 during Thatcher years, when they're 10 years old in 1997 when Tony Blair comes to power, and then in 2007 when the Labour government loses the election, and or rather Tony Blair is succeeded by Gordon Brown, and then in the year 2017 when we are about to enter the process of Brexit, having had the Brexit referendum in the year 2016. But the whole story is told in the form of the music gig, and so there is also a very overt and explicit expectation that the audience should be engaged differently in this piece of theatre. They're not required to sit down as they usually do in theatre. They are not required to switch off their phones. In fact, they are required to tweet live from this show. So it becomes a very interesting trend. Now, this piece is part of a trend that I also felt was contributing to a kind of paradigm shift that I was observing, where we were having kind of in this particular case, a dissolution of boundaries between the medium of theatre and the medium of popular music. And this also represented a continuation of some of the other topics I was exploring in my previous work, such as the ensemble way of working and the ways in which theatre-making processes were changing in these two books. So I felt that I needed to, in a way, continue that line of research. And as I mentioned earlier, that this formed part of a wider aural turn in theatre, which also includes use of new portable technologies such as headphones, recorders, mobile phones, software, etc. So then the research project, I wrote it in 2019. Actually, in 2018, I submitted it. In 2019, it was assessed as successful. And these were the key research questions I wanted to explore. So I wanted to theoretically frame this paradigmatic move towards oral and aural dramaturgy as an emerging interdisciplinary field of inquiry. I wanted to explore potential correlations that can be discerned between technological developments and contemporary performance-making practices, and also to look at the compositional strategies that are underpinned the performance-making, which foregrounds orality and aurality in the 21st century. But I was also proposing a methodological innovation. I claimed that what was needed here was also kind of a new maker-focused research methodology for analyzing selected works and using a combination of oral history, which is what I did in my previous research, contextual research, and rehearsal ethnography. So as part of the project, we selected a number of artists to be the artists in residence, and I have them on the next slide. I think there we are. They were selected in conjunction with Battersea Arts Centre, who was one of the partners on the project, alongside Digital Theatre Plus and the Victoria and Albert Museum. And these artists were selected through an open call. The idea was, of course, the ad was under the umbrella of Aural Dramaturgies, and these different artists were submitting their project ideas that fell under the kind of remit of this research interest in different ways. S.K. Shlomo was kind of making gig theatre. Silvia Mercuriale was making headphones theatre. A graceful collective, a group of dancers, were making dances in which they spoke to the audience and used microphones very extensively. And the San Francisco-based artist Sarah Getz was proposing a very interesting project where they wanted to look at what they called neo-ventriloquism, or rather how one was finding one's voice in the process of gender transition. So, we were going to go into the rehearsal room with these people and actually watch them work for a week at a time. But then COVID intervened, and this caused a sort of transmedial project redesign, where the planned rehearsal ethnography and podcast and conference were replaced with a digital archive of Zoom recordings, which I don't have the time to show you now in more detail, but which is a treasure trove of over 80 recordings with different artists and academics who were invited or commissioned to speak in different ways about relevant topics here. And we had 5 different kinds of recordings: an unstructured audio interview of an artist, an audio conversation between 2 invited guests, often scholars, a case study, a video case study presentation, where we were just using the functions of Zoom recordings really to generate material. So we would commission kind of a reverse engineering presentation from an artist about how they made a particular work, a Q&A interview with scholars talking about specific books, and a masterclass from commissioned artists. And this meant that we generated a network of insights through a sort of process of threefold articulation. The unstructured interview was tracing the trajectory of an artistic idiom of a particular artist. The reverse engineering presentation was giving an in-depth study of a single project, and the pedagogical, the masterclass was presenting a mode of methodological transmission of a particular artist and their way of working. And this created a constellation, or rather, all of these different artists and scholars we interviewed created a constellation of creative and academic work belonging to the same paradigm that served as primary research for the book that came out as part of the project. I just want to briefly return to one of the previous slides, which I skipped over very quickly. This is the theoretical intersections in the project. Part of my thinking and the process of inception was influenced by, this is a quote from Shannon Jackson's book, Professing Performance, in which she talks about the ways in which the oral was in some way marginalized by being aligned with the canonical in American academia. I mean, there isn't even anything notable to mention in British academia that I'm aware of in terms of the studies of rhetoric or orality. But I was quite interested in this sort of historically marginalized status of the oral, or specifically oral interpretation that it exists in the States, and was interested in perhaps redressing this balance with this particular research project I was proposing. So I was very much influenced by the thinking of Shannon Jackson and Dwight Conquergood, specifically his essay Performance Studies, where he talks about the so-called apartheid of knowledges between the embodied knowledge, the literate knowledge, and the embodied knowledge on the other hand. And all his ethnographic work, of course, informed my thinking about ethnography, rehearsal ethnography as drawn from Gay Macaulay, but also the work of Matthew Desmond, Norman Denzin, Anna Devere Smith, Doreen Kondo. Then, of course, there was a line that is concerned with orality and Serbian orature and cyberture and Gutenberg parentheses, the notion of musicalization in post-dramatic theater and the bottom-up storytelling in jazz, and various ways of thinking through sound drawn from scholars such as Julian Henriquez and Stephen Feld and Adriana Cavarero, very, very influential in my work, and Jean-Luc Nancy, as well as in terms of the organization of all of this together, actor network theory by Bruno Latour. Now, I'm aware I'm running out of time, but here are some of the other artists we had as part of the project. I was particularly intrigued by, and I wanted to mention the work of Kate Carrier, who actually is an artist born without biological speech. She works with AAC technology, but her work involves both artists who do have biological speech and artists who don't. And it was the expansion of this project's remit, when we actually went beyond those 4 selected artists, that we were really able to engage with a huge variety of works that cast a different light on this notion of orality and aurality for us. That was really worth addressing, and in this way, it was really kind of a blessing in disguise that we were not able to conduct the project in the way we wanted to. This here is JQ from Vomit International that we also interviewed as part of the project. Now, I do have quite a few more slides, but I will probably have to skip through some of them. That was the book. These are my key findings. So these are the key findings I wanted to share with you. They're not orderly. I came up with them. They're not systematically ordered. I came up with them sort of last night in preparation for this talk. It's a particular way of breaking down the content, but it's not the only way of breaking down the content of this research project. It's just a way of kind of crystallizing something here for you today. I have 10 findings for this purpose. One is drawn from Jean-Luc Nancy's observation in his book on listening, that the sonorous is tendentially metaxic. That is, he says, having to do with participation, sharing, and contagion. And this represents a kind of opposition to the mimetic tendency of the visual. So that's one idea drawn from the theoretical material. And something really corroborated by a lot of the conversations I had with various artists. So this idea that really what the sound provides is a form of participation that is not otherwise foregrounded in a kind of conventional situation where we are presented with visual material on stage. The oral turn in theater in the digital age, however, resolves these binaries between these binaries between the oral and the visual, the digital and the analog, the textual and the embodied, and it kind of dialectically incorporates their affordances within various creative processes. Theater makers are. This comes from the interviews I was having with various people. It became very prominent that the theater makers were really themselves products of various formative cultural influences, and that actually the fact we were witnessing this advent of gig theater was related to the fact that a lot of these artists creating theater in this way were no longer informed in their studies of theater by just studying plays. They were also allowing other formative cultural influences from popular culture and from technology to shape their ways of working. Technological innovation brings about paradigmatic rethinking of form and its potential politicity. It's not often that we think of form as political, but in fact, what was really coming to the fore for me here is the way in which form facilitates a political engagement. And I don't have time to go into detail on this today, but that's discussed in the book in different ways. That digital recording tools are deployed by artists as collaborators, as two of them said that on different occasions, that they were using their recorders as collaborators in creative processes, and that embodied listening is valorized as a generative technique and as a mode of audience engagement. I have 10 of these, but I will break it up with some pictures very quickly. So Maya Krishna Rao and Kate Hunter told me, for example, on different occasions that they use the recording devices as collaborators in the rehearsal process. There is a lot around Anna Devier-Smith's work, both in the interviews she has given. Unfortunately, we didn't get to interview her as part of our project, that she has given to other people, and also in other people's writing about her work around the importance of recording the interviews, and also the importance of embodied listening. And this is Bella Merlin in the production of The Permanent Way with Out of Joint Theatre, which she has written about academically as a professor of acting, where she also talks about this idea of counterpoint that she found in the process of working in this particular way of collecting testimonies and then bringing or reenacting the objects of her research in rehearsal, using the counterpoint between the physicality of the person she was interviewing and the words they were saying, as a way of engaging in this embodied listening and engendering embodied listening in her audiences. That was quite an influential thought for me as well in the writing of the project. Here we have a photo from Putting the Band Back Together, which was a gig theater piece. And what was significant about it was that the audience was invited, if they wanted to come to a band rehearsal before the show started. And then they could play as part of the show. And the show itself was a real life story of an actor who discovered they had terminal illness, and the last thing they wanted to do before they died was to put their band back together. The show is called Putting the Band Back Together. And here we have the author by Tim Crouch, which kind of haunts a lot of my work. It was present there in the theater making book. I wrote about it extensively there, but it's very significant here because it's one of those plays that actually inverts this principle of show rather than tell that we've had as a dominant principle in the 20th century dramaturgy. In this show, nothing is shown, everything is told. And yet it is not a radio play because it requires and it makes a very specific space for the audience to use their agency in this particular situation. Again, I don't have much time to speak about this in detail, but I wanted to bring it here as a reminder of the fact that of my number 6 point, that technology contributes to theater's inherent sensory multimodality, but it is not indispensable. Sometimes technology conditioned compositional logics result in low-tech manifestations, as is the case in The Author by Tim Crouch. And these are kind of some of the terms I've developed in the discussion of these oral dramaturgies around the use of the counterpoint, the use of the semantic gap for the audience, the use of embodied collective critique, and the discursive communities that a lot of these works create around themselves. Notably, The Author did. The potential of technology to enhance accessibility and inclusivity, but the fact that this is dramaturgically deployed, the fact that the technological affordances in relation to accessibility are actually built into the dramaturgical work on particular pieces. Technological augment the post-punk DIY self-authorizing ethos of multi-professionalized theater makers and their audiences. That's again a theme coming from my previous work. The oral dramaturgies have decentering, decolonial, and democratizing potential, but dramaturgical innovation is not contingent on digital technologies, as I noted earlier. And here, as my last example, I want to briefly mention the work of the German artist Oliver Zahn, who we discovered during the COVID lockdown. He had made a piece called In Praise of Forgetting, which was a solo show where he built a Jenga tower consisting of replicas of reel-to-reel recordings from the 1940s and 1950s, where those who were expelled from non-German lands after the Second World War moved into Germany and were interviewed by ethnographers at the time. A lot of these people were Nazi sympathizers. Nonetheless, their testimonies were collected and memorialized. And in this piece called In Praise of Forgetting, Oliver Zahn, in the course of performance, interviews this archive that he has reproduced on the stage by randomly pulling out different artifacts and playing them for the audience. And the purpose of his piece is really to question, what is worth memorializing and why. And he was invited to present this piece as part of a festival in the UK called Gift Festival in Newcastle in 2020. But because COVID intervened, he did not want to just send a recording of this performance, but he wanted to make a version of this performance called In Praise of Forgetting 2, which he performed on his Mac desktop. And he performed it via Zoom as a live performance. And it was a very thrilling example, if you like, of transmediality, conditioned by those specific conditions of COVID lockdown, in which he completely repurposed those materials, and sort of the content, the underlying content was still the same, but the form was adapted to the circumstances. And of course, the two pieces are still quite different from each other. They are not, it's not sort of an exact replica. It is a sequel in some ways. And he, of course, uses the affordances of the desktop in different ways to manipulate the footage using text boxes, using his archive on his computer, and spoiler alert, using the bin icon on his desktop as well, which I think was not something that was available to him in the original performance. But this was quite a striking example of work. We interviewed Oliver Zahn as well, and in relation to the previous work of his that kind of led to this piece as well, which throws some very interesting insights up. Now, in terms of transmediality, this is my second to last slide, and I think I'm okay just for another couple of minutes to share this. Now, as I said at the beginning, I'm not really a transmediality expert, but I did sort of look at some key texts and in trying to position this work in relation to the concerns of transmediality. The foundational text on convergence by Henry Jenkins kind of draws attention to a cultural shift, as he calls it, which is not dissimilar to what McLuhan and others have also spoken about. In terms of the fact that this is paradigmatic, the kind of technological progress is a cultural shift, not just a shift in terms of the media themselves replacing each other. But he talks about the flow of content across multiple media, and accounts also for the notions of participation and collective intelligence in this work. Nonetheless, in my perception, it remains very much on this linear kind of plane. And Marie-Laure Ryan in 2013 tries to kind of redress this somewhat, or approach it differently from the perspective of narratology and transfictionality. And she usefully identifies two different kinds of transmediality or transmedial storytelling specifically, which is what I'm interested here in. And one is the snowball effect that happens across media, where we have like a Harry Potter novel that then becomes a film and then becomes a show and so on, and then fan fiction develops around it. Or on the other hand, multi-platform media franchises where different where there's a story world built around a particular set of protagonists. And actually Magda has spoken very beautifully about both of these classifications in her lecture as part of this series. But what I wanted to contribute to this discussion from the point of view of the Aural Dramaturgies project is to kind of place the focus on this categorical difference between, on the one hand, the literate, and on the other hand, the aural, theatrical, essentially, digital and cyboral, to bring Ngugi wa Thiong'o into this again. And I deliberately put this, I don't want to build a binary out of this. I'm not suggesting this is a binary, but I am kind of returning to this idea of the Gutenberg parenthesis, and that the literate was in some ways characterized by linear processes of thinking, the Western metaphysics, hierarchies, mimesis and oculocentricity, the text performance hierarchy, story transitioning across media, privileging of the story and the author. Whereas on the other hand, we have privileging of the audience, the media producing conditions for the engagement with the story, inextricability of text and performance, because when you have spoken text, it is at the same time text that is performed. The notion of metaxis and participation, the notion of networks as opposed to hierarchies, the notion of decolonial epistemologies and non-linear layered interlinked apprehension of the gestalt, which, you know, is present in these kind of specifically theater works that privilege the oral and the aural. Now, the understanding of transmedia in conclusion is not strictly linked to, in my view, to neoliberal capitalist expansion of media, but is always already characteristic of non-canonic historical forms of performance and authorship and marginalized ways of knowing. And to just corroborate this with a quote from Thiong'o, this is the last page of his book, Global Ethics, in which he says, the problem has not been the fact of the oral or the written, but their placement in a hierarchy. Network, not hierarchy, will free the richness of the aesthetic, oral, or literary. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Duska. We want to first open it up to see if there are any audience members who would like to ask questions.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Duska, I do have a question. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about it because you mentioned this a relationship of hierarchy that exists between the written word and the pronounced word. Yeah, there is a sort of assumption that the oral came before the written word, and the written word is like the finite. Yeah, I mean, you know, in legal system, it's the written word that is is the, you know, is the real thing. And now returning back to digital, which seems to be in a kind of liminal space between oral and linguistic, yeah? I mean, between oral and written. And digital seems to exist in a kind of a liminal space. Its legitimacy is not yet fully confirmed, but it's not completely delegitimized, yeah? But it's not grounded, it's not anchored in the same meaning that, you know, printed word used to have, yeah? And so that's sort of interesting to think about legitimacy of, you know, each of this linguistic expression. Or literature, you know, each format, how legitimate it is, how it is perceived in different contexts as legitimate or as illegitimate, yeah?
Absolutely, yeah. I'm just looking for a link because the first, it's really interesting, Magda, that you arrive at the topic from this angle. It's not something I anticipated, but it is something that did kind of cross our radar as part of the project. And we here have a so-called salon, as we call it on the website, a salon conversation between two legal scholars, Daniel Mandic and Sarah Ramshaw, who talk about this very notion you are asking about, the kind of legitimate power or the legal power of the spoken word and the digital technology and so on. It's a kind of rambling conversation. We wanted this as part of the project. All of our conversations in this salon are unstructured because we wanted to understand this process of free improvisation. So I don't mean that in a negative sense when I say it's a sprawling conversation. I mean it's actually quite rich in its content and doesn't give a straightforward answer to this question, but they do consider things like using AI in legal discourses, for example, and so on. So that's kind of a very literal way of answering your question of the legitimacy of the spoken word and the versus the legitimacy of the written word versus the legitimacy of whatever comes in the digital as a result of the digital realm. And I think that's a very interesting question. I haven't pursued further and deeper thought about it, I have to say. But I think maybe the way it is directly related to specifically the concerns of dramaturgy, maybe around the issues of copyright. Okay, so how do we copyright appropriately works that maybe emerge in this way, where you know they're not written to begin with as texts that are published, but the text emerges out of this compositional process as a kind of, you know, an element of it or a byproduct of the creative process. And it is a big question, and people have dealt with it in different ways. And of course, artists are quite protective of their work, understandably, in a situation like this. But I think that as part of this paradigmatic change, we somehow need to accommodate these processes and find ways of kind of finding consensus around their legitimacy. So it's up to all of us, really, to find ways of working together on protecting this work. And that's, I think, quite an interesting challenge for us.
I wanted to ask you because, there's a long history of radio plays, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
But the more recent radio plays are not just reading of the drama, but they often involve like walking around somewhere and listening to something, things like that. There is a little bit different feel to it than traditional, radio play. Yeah, it was very drama based, and this contemporary, audio plays are more of a post dramatic, way of structuring dramaturgy.
Yeah.
Have you any kind of, I mean, and of course, then there is this sort of difference between sound in spectacle and sound on its own as it exists. Yeah. Did you find that there needs to be like a specific type of oral dramaturgy for those works which are detached from the spectacle?
Yes, I mean, yes, it's not. So I'm just trying to think now about in response to works detached from the spectacle, because there are some, and there is a whole body of work that was covered by people like Adam Olston, about theater in the dark, for example, where we are sitting together in a space, in a dark space, and we are listening. Our experience is primarily listening. So in the dark, there is nothing to see, but the experience is shared. Now, we did not cover this work as part of our project, because I think for me, I was quite interested from the very beginning in this interaction between the heard and the seen. So I think maybe even if it wasn't there explicitly, I think it was always there for me implicitly, that I was interested in the way in which the speech and sound on the one hand and the image on the other coexisted, interacted, or created opportunities on the stage. But when you talk about oral work that is primarily oral, I think probably the most significant body of work we have on the website in that category is by one of the artists in residence, Silvia Mercuriali, who linked to her work I've seen, I've presented here in the chat. And the way she makes work is she actually creates these headphones pieces for the audience, to kind of experience their real life, everyday settings. Like you have a piece where you go into a supermarket and you listen to this score, and but you just react to whatever there is nothing that is preset in this supermarket. You just simply follow instructions in the supermarket, and it acquires a kind of performative aura around itself. Or the work that she was going to develop as part of our project, and she did develop it as part of our project, was one that was designed. It was meant to be designed to be performed in swimming pools, and the audience would be sitting in a swimming pool with headphones on and watching swimmers. And these would be, a lot of them would be regular swimmers, and one of them would be an actor. But this did not happen because of COVID, so it became a piece about swimming, but that was intended to be heard in your bathroom. And there was a version for the bath and a version for the shower. And her work, when she talked about her work and the way she works, is that even though all of her work is entirely sound-based, well, not all of it, there are some performances as well involving actors, she foregrounded in the conversation about her work that really her main inspiration was film. When she was developing her artistic idiom, as I call it, that actually she was thinking about how sound that we hear can actually change the perception of what we see. So I thought that was quite interesting, that even if you don't stage anything, but if you give the audience headphones and a score to listen to, it might create a certain way of interacting with your environment.
All right. Any questions from the audience? Okay. Thank you so much, Zuzka.
Ula has a question.
Oh, okay. Hold on. I haven't seen it. Let me just make sure. Ula, go ahead.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Can you unmute yourself?
Hear you.
Sorry. Thank you for your talk, Dushka. Nice to see you.
Yeah, you too.
I think you actually said what I was going to say, because I wanted to ask you about, of course, the role of imagination.
Yeah.
And I've been particularly interested in what you just said about what you imagine can change your perception. So I was just wondering if how you'd work with the concept of imagination in your project.
Oh, it's such a great question. I wish I had known about your wonderful work, before this project was kind of coming to full fruition, because it would have been really relevant to have accounted for the perspectives you bring to this topic from the point of view of the history of imagination. And I guess it falls as part of this work that we were doing. It very much falls under the category of kind of what we call, like, informally as engaging the audience. Engaging the audience differently or not so differently, because as your work shows, it has been there historically, but provides different means of engaging the audience and their imagination. And you and I have talked about the work of Tim Crouch and how he creates conditions for that in a very specific way, which is why I still include his work in these considerations, even though it's a very low-tech approach to engaging the audience differently. So it's very valuable, and it certainly needs. I certainly need to somehow, extend and expand in that category. Thank you.
Tara, do you want to jump in?
Oh, I just had a comment. Thanks for such a fascinating talk.
Thank you.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I was just thinking about it in relationship to remediation and Bolter and Grusin. It was just really a comment to say that might be helpful for thinking through transmediation.
Oh, great. Oh, great. Thank you. Can you say a few more words about it?
Yeah, I mean, I found Bolter and Grusin to be sort of fundamental to thinking about the way I work through notions of the analog. And I've also found Ong's work really useful. And I teach a course on audio dramaturgy at Exeter, and your project's been really helpful. So it was nice to hear your talk today.
Thank you. Thank you, Kara. Okay, I will, if you wouldn't mind putting this reference in the chat, I will certainly pursue it. Thank you.
Okay, sure thing. Yeah, cheers.
All right. Okay, thank you so much, everyone. And we wanna, hold on, I'm frozen here. We wanna thank Mahindra Humanity Center and Metal Lab at Harvard for hosting us today. And this talk is recorded and will be posted online so people can watch it later or can share with others. And thank you so much, Duska. It was a great talk and very much interesting addition to our 5-year-long conversation on transmediality and theater and arts in general. I appreciate everybody's joining us today. And thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you, Magda. And everyone else.